Hello and welcome to the Innovation Cafe. Thank you for joining us for future-proof integration of innovation management and enterprise apps. I'm Jen Sayufi, our moderator for today's webinar. If at any time you have a question, please ask it using the chat or question function within GoToWebinar. You can also interact with our team via social media by tweeting to @Mindjet using the hashtag InnovationCafe. Following the presentation, we will have a 15-minute Q&A period and we'll answer any of your questions at that time. We will also be recording our webinar, which will be available to view on our website shortly following this session. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. First off, we have Milind Pansare, who is Vice President of Product Marketing at Mindjet. Then we have Charles Bergeman, who is Technical Product Manager for SpigitEngage, and Michael Connor, Software Architect at Mindjet. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Milind.
Great. Thank you, Jen, and welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today. Today's webinar is all about APIs, application programming interfaces, specifically to SpigitEngage for innovation management. Just to set an expectation of what you're going to be hearing through the next 45 minutes with us, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the philosophy behind why we felt like we needed a new approach to this whole problem of APIs to innovation management systems. And I'm going to set the stage at a very high level for Charles Bergeman, who's our Director of Product Strategy here at Mindjet, to then take you through in a further level of detail through the actual meat of the APIs themselves. At the end of that, we're fortunate enough to have Michael Connor, Software Architect at Mindjet, and we're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to actually geek out a little bit. So stay with us on this, because towards the end, you're going to get a chance to take a look at the actual data that goes back and forth as we put the APIs through their paces, and even a small little demo app to illustrate some of the concepts. So we realize several of you might be at a business level, some of you might be very technical, and we have a varied audience, but trust us, it's going to be a fun 45 minutes, and we'll try and keep it at a good level for everybody to follow along. So with that, let me throw a buzzword at you, the Internet of Things. It seems like no matter where you turn today, you can't get away from this word. Now, perhaps one of the more authoritative places to go look at what the Internet of Things is all about is the IEEE Communication Society. And not too long ago, I was actually struck by a few observations that I read on their blog, and you have the URL out there. I would encourage you to go check it out. And the observation was really about what is the big deal about the Internet of Things. And if you look into that blog, it's the first thing really is that this is happening, right? So all around us, devices are now connected via Wi-Fi to the net. There's tons of data being created. There's tons of data being consumed and interchanged. So this is really happening. It is not business as usual. So it has actually transformed business models. It has changed the way apps are developed. It has, in fact, changed entire industries and models of collaboration in our real day-to-day lives. The key behind the Internet of Things, if you take away the buzzword for a moment, is about being able to sense and exchange data. So data becomes king in the Internet of Things. And if you have to take one thing out of the buzzword, it's all about the interchange of data. So is this the next big thing? Well, perhaps in and of itself, it is not the next big thing, but it is for sure an enabler of something that could be the next big thing on the Internet. So let's contrast that for a moment and look at the enterprise app landscape. I think we are all aware of the fact that enterprise apps and enterprise app architecture follows, perhaps not as fast as we'd like it to, the trends that are going on in the consumer internet. And it behooves us, therefore, to draw in our philosophy as we are looking at APIs, something that is really at the forefront of what's happening in the consumer net. So if you look at enterprise apps, there are all these systems of record that are strewn around the enterprise. There's your ERP system, there's your PLM system, there's your CRM system. It almost seems like everything needs to be TLA, a three-letter acronym. Now, you add to that mix an innovation management system, which is fast at some of the largest companies becoming a system of record, where your ideas that are going to get converted into products are a repository that's being stored, and people are coming into this equation as well. So we're connecting not just a new system, which is innovation management, but we're connecting in crowds. Private crowds, which are your employees, and public crowds, which are the customer insights, into these systems as well. And in order to do that, we had to break away from some of the flat techniques that were used for what we would consider a first generation of API integration, which is simply being able to say and exchange a few things programmatically between your PPM system and your innovation management system. And that's truly been the state of the art so far. So in and of itself, does this give you integration? I'll be the first to say no, because what we are doing and what we are going to talk to you about today is setting the framework with the graph APIs for the ability to do rich integrations that are beyond just the simple activity stream kinds of integrations that you've seen in the recent past with most of these innovation management systems. So at this point, what I'm going to do is hand it over to Charles. And Charles, if you could be so kind as to walk us through some of the fundamental notions that went into the graph APIs.
Sure. So when the overall approach that we took to building the APIs covers a lot of territory, because we wanted to make sure that we embraced internet standards, meaning that any internet standards that existed and that had taken root, we wanted to embrace those and make sure that we were compliant with those. The other thing that we wanted to do is embrace the semantic web, and that really targets a web of data versus applications and sites. Traditionally, things had been dealt with in terms of describing your system in terms of a way to connect one application to another. And what we're realizing is that those connections are actually through data. And depending on how you describe your data, if it's in a standard form that is speaking the language of other systems out there, you have a better chance of making a seamless integration than you do without that kind of an approach. And in the process, we have developed an ontology to describe, or a vocabulary associated with enterprise innovation that we also feel will become a standard for describing innovation across systems. And in the process of doing that, this should facilitate the integration of data across a variety of different systems with different schemas and allow us to be more seamless in those integrations. And the end product of all of this is to future-proof our application in terms of integration. Now, one of the things that's underlying that semantic approach is a graph model versus what might be traditionally used in terms of describing applications as a table-driven or columnar approach to describing your data. And what makes that really different is that things are described, or entities in our system are described in terms of their relationships. And these relationships are dynamic. They grow organically in the system. And those relationships are very deep. They have threads that go into the system fairly deep. And because it's dynamic and it's relationship-based, it gives us tremendous flexibility. So the concepts that we've developed in terms of describing innovation, we described at a very generic level. However, and that means that we can then take those concepts and leverage them going forward with future development in such a way that we can move in many different directions in terms of our innovation program. The interesting thing about that is all of the current SpigitEngage concepts that are built into the product today fit very nicely into this. And what it means, though, is that the way we manifest those today in our current user interface could change drastically over time, but the core concepts will remain the same. So if you're doing integrations, the core concepts are a concrete set of concepts that won't change over time. Go ahead. One of the things that we do in terms of setting this up and adapting to standards is we're using OAuth 2.0 to develop a means of authorizing the user and the application to access our system. In the process, we have an application registration process, which you'll see in a little bit, that allows you to register your application within SpigitEngage. And when you do that, you get a unique application ID and a shared secret that you can use to generate a token when you access the system. We at the same time ask for contact information, which we can use to connect with the application owner or the person who's supporting the application in the case that we need to have a conversation with them about something that's going on with their application. And the last thing that's listed here is the user authorization settings. Some of you who use Facebook apps might have experienced a situation where you first connect to the app and it immediately asks you, will you authorize this application to operate on your behalf when we connect to Facebook, to read your information, to post back information to Facebook. In the same way, we're allowing for that same sort of capability if you build an app that connects to your Engage instance, to give the user an opportunity to authorize that application to perform certain functions on their behalf. It is a RESTful interface for the API. It supports standard HTTP protocols for interfacing with the application. And the interesting thing about this, as I mentioned before, when you get that application ID and the secret, when you use that to connect to our system, you're getting an OAuth 2 token that allows all of the communication going back and forth between SpigitEngage and your application to operate on behalf of that user. And what that means is that whatever authentication process you have in place with your SpigitEngage instance is going to be respected by the API. So that means that if you have a single sign-on connection that goes into your directory, when you make this connection, it'll be respecting those security processes. In addition, once you are connected, any access rules that particular user is that are applicable to that particular user will be respected when you're using the API. So that means that certain things that they shouldn't see will not be revealed to them through calls through the API. So in terms of what we're exposing from SpigitEngage, we took the tack that we would expose all of the core Spigot functionality. What we wanted to do is make sure that anybody using this first implementation of the APIs would be able to do a robust application that included all of the basic functionality of the system. So that includes getting access to all the communities, challenges, ideas, comments, etc., including any core metric data or scores around that information. We also wanted to be able to make it so that you could actually make it an interactive application, so that you could post back to the to SpigitEngage, posting an idea, a comment, or a vote, and be able to have that be a very robust experience. Let's go forward here. Let's get a little bit more detail into what I'm talking about here. So in terms of retrieving data, I can get a list of all of the communities, and keep in mind that this respects the permissions of that particular user that you're signed in on, so it will automatically filter out any communities that I don't have access to. But the communities that do get returned, I'll get the community name, description, list of all the challenges associated with that community, list of participants, any score summaries associated with a community. So if I wanted to do a roll-up view of what's going on in the community, I can do that. Similarly, for a particular community, I can get a list of all of the challenges for that community. And for each challenge, I can get a list of the title, the description, the graphic associated with that challenge, all of the ideas that have been collected for that challenge, a list of the participants, Challenges have time-bound phases associated with them, so I can figure out what the start and end date of the any of the phases is, as well as what phase it's currently in. I can get a list of the number of ideas, votes, and comments, so the scores associated with that challenge. So if I want to just kind of give a quick view of what's going on in the challenge, I can do that. Ideas. I can get a list of, for any particular challenge or community, I can get a list of all of the ideas associated with that particular challenge or community. And for that ideas, individual ideas, I can get an identify the idea creator, and as a part of that process, I can get their avatar, I can get any of the user information, including whatever demographic information you have about that user. I get the title description. I can get the custom fields associated with the idea template for that particular challenge or community. As it's possible to customize those idea forms, I can get all of the data associated with that idea. And I can also get the comment thread that includes a way of reflecting the original post of a comment as well as any replies to that comment. Posting capabilities. Let's just talk about that briefly. I can post an idea to a challenge or a community, and as part of that, as I alluded to, because each challenge or community can have a unique form that's required to post an idea. In other words, a collection of fields, some of them required, some of them not, some of them validated to certain values and some of them not, different types of fields. I can get a complete list of what's required for that particular challenge or community to post an idea. So if I wanted to replicate what shows up in SpigitEngage in terms of a post form, I can do that very accurately using the information I can get from the API. In addition, I can post a comment to an idea, post a vote to an idea, post a comment, a vote on a comment, and I can follow or unfollow an idea. Subscribe or unsubscribe to an idea. And finally, I just want to talk briefly about just in a more sophisticated approach to doing this, and something we'll show a little bit of a sample for later, is I can create a leaderboard or a dashboard of the top rated ideas, the most liked ideas, number of ideas per stage, these kinds of things that appear in the application today. So if I wanted to replicate those kinds of leaderboards, I can do that in my application. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Michael Connor, our software architect, to give you a little demo of what this actually looks like in the system.
Oops. As usual, I picked the wrong. Here we are. So I get to be in charge of the GeekFest part of this, so I'm looking forward to this. I'm in control of your screens. Be very afraid. But what we're going to do, this business of data and standards and internet and all that can get abstract very quickly. So we thought the best way to get into it is to just get our hands dirty with some actual data. That would correspond to your site and get to just feel how some of these things work. And we're going to end with a simple little leaderboard widget of the sort that you might write for yourself. What we have here, so I'm just double checking that you can all see my screen. It looks pretty good there. I have a mythical SpigitEngage community set up here of people who have a thing about desserts and sugars and whatnot, and they're discussing, you know, how to do the next big thing. And to start with, now I'm logged in here as the admin. I'm just going to briefly come in to the admin page and come down to the API management page and look at our setup for the application. So Charles a minute ago was talking about how we follow the OAuth 2 standard for authentication. You know, we really have a thing about standards, and the OAuth 2 is, you know, quickly becoming, you know, the 1,000-pound gorilla in this era, championed by Google and Microsoft and others. There's a solid community behind it. And it starts with registering an application. So this is how you would register your own application identity and engage. You go into this particular page in your admin. I have a couple here, but this one is one whose name is Sucro City Dashboard. It's got a description. The system then gives us an ID and a secret that we'll use to do our authenticated queries against it. And then some basic other information. Central to the security of OAuth 2 is that you actually register where your app is coming from so that nobody can spoof or pretend to be in access who's not really there. So for this, I have two, and in the end, I'm actually going to demonstrate a little, my app is coming from some server that's elsewhere and not within the Engage server. And then contact information, who actually owns this thing. So let's give it a try. I'm going to sign out to just give the whole sense of how it goes. We'll start by executing a query that gets a token. And this gets fairly complex, but our documentation goes into it in some detail. But you basically do a query against the URL for your Engage community with this standard endpoint, and then the ID of the app that you just registered. And we're going to actually execute that now. Let's try that again this way. In the OAuth model, everything wants to execute as a known and securely identified app running under the authority of a securely identified user. As Charles was saying, we plug into whatever authentication scheme your community is set up with. It's one of the powers of SpigitEngage is that we have a deep connection to your enterprise's authorization systems. In this case, it sees that I don't have a live session, so I'm going to log in as Mr. Stardust. And if I can remember what my password is, here we go. And the first time a user authenticates to a particular app, there's an extra step where we actually ask the user, is it okay for this app to be running under your authority? This is basically the final check that everything's good and someone isn't pretending to be something that they shouldn't. So yes, I am okay with this. I'll click accept. And then you get this information back. Now, normally, your user wouldn't see this. This is a package of information that comes straight back to your app, but we've displaying it on the screen just so that you can see what's going on. The critical part is this access token that we're going to be using to authenticate our queries in a second. And there's two other things worth noting. We give you the ID of who you are. This is basically an entity ID in our system. And we give you the ID of the community, of the environment that you're logging into. So you can start to see now the nature of our data model is these IDs are internet URLs. Full-fledged. And so to find out the information about the user, I'll just take that thing and I'll query to it. Now, I intentionally lied a little bit here. If you just do it right in your browser, it comes up with this little error message saying I'm missing an authorization header. We needed that access token. So to actually execute this, I can't quite do it from, directly from a browser line. I need some sort of a tool in my browser to do that. All of the browsers have what they call REST clients. I'm demoing right now using Chrome. Chrome has several REST clients. I have this thing called Postman, which works fine for me. There are a couple of others. Maybe you might find one that's more to your taste. But if I come back now and grab that URL once again and execute it, and again, just to prove, this is the same thing that we did a second ago. I'm getting the same message back. But now what I need to do is to grab this access token value here. And I'm come back to Postman. I'm going to add a header. I'm going to add the authorization header. Again, this is just standard OAuth 2. In fact, just about every authorization scheme that uses HTTP does the same sort of thing now. And you give the value bearer and a space and that access token and execute the query. Now we actually see the data that belongs to this particular entity. We repeat back to you our ID. In sort of this internet-based world, all of the IDs you know, can't be a long thing. Anyone who's familiar with XML, there's a standard game you play where you define namespaces that take the pressure off of all of these long, you know, early prefix parts of the URLs that are repetitive. And so we standardly define this prefix _ds, which just shows you this is, you know, the particular local database that we're talking to, and all of our IDs then are within that context. So what you see just poking around now is that I have lots of elements of this particular entity that's referring to other entities. And this is the graph nature, that so much of the information of the data comes from the relationship between entities. So you can see now that I am Ziggy Stardust, and I have some account information I can find. Scores are basically where things like my reputations in different communities, those sorts of things live. The metrics that we manage in SpigitEngage is a key part of what drives and manages your innovation experience. And then just to see, I have you know, the ideas that I've created is one of the properties that I have here. So I can do the same thing now, come back here and grab that community ID and just do a REST query against that using the same authorization. And now I get a whole bunch of information about that community. We can see from the response that it is of type community, created by a particular user at a particular time, a whole ton of information. I'd like to sort of tie that back to, let me get back into the app over here. What actually do I have? In the help doc, in the help menu for your app, we have the documentation that is a fairly deep dive into the model, and it's divided into a section, a tutorial section that just walks you step by step into actually, you know, doing first-time executions of these yourself to get a sense, to get your own sense. A 30,000-foot sort of ecosystem view of what are the different pieces and how do they relate to each other. And then, you know, an in-depth normative section that shows you, you know, very precisely for a given type, what are the values that are legal. So to get an exact sense of what exactly is going on in a community, I lost my here. You know, I can just come in here and search for, if I can spell it right, community in the doc. And you know, you have the entry that gives you the explanation of this is the detail, you know, properties and classes and expectations around properties in that, as well as other information like how that, you know, the community objects tend to relate to other community objects. Just to get a deeper sense of maybe the relationships this community has within it, let's just pick up one of these things. So this is an idea that's within this community, and we'll query for it just by executing a REST query against that ID, and we get its information. Starting with, right, this idea has a property called assessments, which are the various votes and reviews. SpigitEngage has a rule that says I only get to see my own votes. So here we can see that, yes, I've done an up-down vote on this idea. In fact, I didn't like it. It's a -1 vote. The content and title of the ID, here's who's following this idea. A lot of information that I'm not going to get into now, except to just give you a taste that here it is, and this is the kind of thing that you can see. I want to go back for a second and look at that community and look a little bit more closely at the kind of data that might go into a leaderboard. So under the community, there is a property called idea scores. These are the things that keep, you know, the different metrics about ideas in the context of this community. And I could drill into that by extending my query in this way, just giving the name of the property, So essentially adding on to your URL amounts to, property selections or a .op if you're a programmer. And you can see you get all these things, but that's kind of boring. I'd like to see what's in them. So we have a sort of a standard query parameter called fields, and if I just say star, it'll give me everything. This is sort of the broadside of the barn dumping of information. You can see that there's a lot of information that's available. But let's drill into, in particular, the approval rating. There's other ratings that are available, but let's look at that one right now. And then the base is the idea that is the foundation of this. So I could come back and say, well, no, what I just want to see is the approval rating and the base. And you'll see that for all of the different elements here. But now, actually, the base alone is kind of boring. There are ideas, so I want to just go ahead and get the title and maybe the creator and the creation time of that. So we can do a query that gets those. Well, actually, maybe for the creator, what I'd like to do is to go ahead and get their name and their avatar. And so so what I'm quickly introducing is that in a single query, I can target the kind of data that I want, and I can specify the projection of the graph into the particular data that I'm interested in for the app that I'm developing. This is really important because when you have really all of the information in an interesting and complex application such as ours available to you, we don't want to presuppose a certain subset because we're probably going to leave something important out, but I don't want to give you everything all the time because that's massively inefficient and fairly confusing too. So you have this fairly powerful way of being able to specify the view through which you want to see your data. So I'm going to just end with an actual running example of doing this sort of thing. I have built a little leaderboard widget. And if you pay attention to the top here, you can see that this widget is being served from some other system in our world. So wherever your application comes from, there it is. I had to register this domain name back when we were registering the application, if you might remember. So that's how we know that this was safe. If I tried some other source, it'd get rejected with an authentication error. It knows, because of the access token that I'm using, that I'm logged in as Ziggy Stardust, and it'll give me the data that's appropriate to me. If we just look at the JavaScript that's sitting inside of this, it's really not that complicated. This is about 150 lines long. At the top, there's the few lines that do the business of checking that I have a session token, and if I don't, doing that, redirect to the OAuth2 endpoint that will get you logged in. And then following that are the queries that are getting the particular data that I need with the particular selection and projection from the full Mindjet graph into the particular data that you need here. Here's a case that's actually getting all of those. That one query is the one now that's getting all of the inquiries that are in the community I'm in, all of those ideas that are in the inquiries, all of the users with their avatars, and this is the approval rating sorted in that way. Taking that data and generating the DOM is very simple JavaScript at that point because the heavy lifting of extracting the data has already been done for you. And with that, I guess that's the end of what I need to demonstrate.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Michael. I think what you've helped us do is really visualize how one could walk the graph, as it were, and hence the name, the Mindjet Graph APIs. I also want to encourage folks who are on and who stayed with us through the deep dive that we just did to submit your questions using the question window or the chat window in GoToWebinar. While you're doing that, let me take a brief moment to remind you to also register for a webinar we're very excited about. Brett Havens, who's the Director of Innovation at AT&T and is responsible for TIP, which is the innovation pipeline. It's easily one of the largest innovation management programs in the world, with over 130,000 employees actively using the platform at AT&T for several years now. And Brett's going to be talking about this in his webinar in the Innovation Cafe coming up on August 13th. It's going to be at 10 a.m. U.S. Pacific time, and it's a 45-minute interactive webinar. You can register for it by going to mindjet.com. It's right on the front page. There's a little box where you can register for it. And, you know, what's really going to be interesting and what I'm looking forward to is this is a good example of a program that has not just achieved cost efficiencies and new products, but also achieved an unprecedented level of engagement. So Brett will hopefully share with us some of the innovations that have come out of this program that include things that you've probably heard a lot about, such as AT&T sponsored data. It's been in the news lately, and you probably haven't missed that. It's included things like the It Can Wait campaign, which is one of the largest media campaigns AT&T is doing right now. Packages of mobile packages such as Study Abroad, and also things that are on the App Store, apps such as Drive Mode and Toggle. All of these are great stories of innovations that have been put in practice at AT&T using crowd science and really tapping into their employees. So with that, I'd like to switch over to the Q&A part of today's webinar. And I see here that we have a first question. I'm going to take that while we get a few more. And the first question here is, and perhaps Charles, you could help us with this, what kind of training materials are available to existing customers of SpigitEngage on the APIs?
Sure. Well, you may have saw a little glimpse of one of the items that's available, and when Mike was doing his presentation, he brought up the help file, and there are several tutorial references in that document, and it's pretty good in terms of giving you a scope of the types of things that you might want to do in terms of getting a list of communities, getting a list of challenges. All of the things I described in my presentation earlier are described in tutorials, as well as being able to post back to the system. So it's pretty good there. In addition, there are 4 one-hour-long videos that were created during our beta process that go from getting started all the way to building an application. And I think that there's a pretty thorough, and it can give you a really good prep to getting involved with the APIs. And we'll be publishing that list of videos in our support site when the product is available.
Good, thanks. And that reminds me, Charles, also that prior to releasing these APIs, we wanted to be absolutely sure that these APIs were vetted with a small set of power users.
That's right.
And that's one of the things that we did. We followed a fairly rigorous beta process as well, and so that we could be certain that these are ready for prime time. I see another question coming in, and the question here is, can you provide some sample use cases where one would leverage these capabilities within enterprise applications?
Sure. In fact, I'll reference the beta program there. We had a number of customers participate in that, but just to give you a couple of examples of what was done during the 4-week beta period, one customer actually built a server-side application. It's an unattended script that would poll the SpigitEngage system for data that they wanted to leverage in their own analytics application. So they actually have a routine that will periodically gather data from SpigitEngage and make it available in their analytics tools. And this application, my understanding is it's actually ready to go. It was actually built during the beta program. They're just waiting for the final release of the product so that they can actually deploy it in production. So that was a pretty good example. The other example is actually in one morning, one of the customers used their Rusty Objective-C skills, which I was just kind of amused that that's the way the person described it, as a means of developing a sample mobile application. And they were able to retrieve information about communities and challenges, lists of ideas, and so forth, and even provide a ability to post ideas in just a morning's worth of effort. I thought that was pretty impressive that in just that short period of time they were able to get that much success.
That's great. I see one other question, and you may have touched upon this in your support resources, but the question is there a white paper that goes into the APIs in a little more detail?
I wouldn't say it's a white paper at this point, but we will have release notes that go through exactly what we're putting together in this release, and we will also provide guidance to the tutorial information that I referenced earlier, and we can certainly provide an overview. The one thing I'm just going to point out is that the scope of what we're releasing here in terms of the APIs is very extensive. We actually have covered a lot of territory with the initial release of this application, and the documentation is very thorough. So it covers the entire scope of what we've released and gives you a really good grounding in what can be done with the application.
Right, and if I was following Michael when he did the demo, the documentation you can get right off the help in the app itself. So
That's
if you're
correct.
in there as an administrator and you go into the admin docs, you have all of the documentation you need to build any sort of app.
That's correct.
Right in there. And then, of course, there's all these videos on the support side as well. I'm mindful of everyone's time. I know we are coming to 10:45, which was our end for this webinar. I'm seeing a couple other questions. Some of them are a little bit of an overlap or repeat of the existing questions. For those of you whose questions we were not able to get to today, please feel free to contact us. If you're an existing Spigot customer, you already have your support contacts. If you're not and you're a prospect, feel free to reach out to the account executive working with you or send an email to adr@mindjet.com, and that will get you in touch with one of our account development reps. So with that, again, don't forget to register for the next Innovation Cafe on mindjet.com. And I'd like to thank you very much for spending 45 minutes with us. We've enjoyed talking to you, and we hope you'll be back for the next webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.